Tonight, we are not just looking at a fatal shooting in Minneapolis, we are examining a growing storm inside the Department of Homeland Security itself. Because what happened on that street did not end with a gunshot, it continued in press briefings, official statements, and a public narrative that many within the agency now quietly say does not match what they saw, what they know, and what the evidence shows. A 37-year-old ICU nurse is dead. Federal agents say it was self-defense. Eyewitness videos suggest a very different picture, and behind closed doors, sources reveal a wave of frustration, anger, and moral unease among DHS personnel over how this incident has been publicly framed. This is no longer only a story about a shooting. It is a story about credibility, truth, and the widening gap between official rhetoric and observable reality, a gap that is now impossible to ignore. On January 24, 2026, in the heart of Minneapolis, an incident unfolded that has shaken not just one community, but the entire nation's confidence in how federal law enforcement operates and how its actions are explained to the public. That day, 37-year-old Alexander Alex Pretty, a registered intensive care unit nurse and U.S. citizen, was shot and killed by agents from the U.S. Border Patrol, a component of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. According to official DHS statements, agents were conducting an enforcement operation in a busy Minneapolis neighborhood. The department publicly said that Pretty approached federal officers with a 9mm handgun and posed a threat, forcing agents to open fire in what they described as self-defense. But within hours of the shooting, multiple bystander videos and eyewitness accounts began to tell a different story, one that sharply contradicts the official account. In widely shared footage, what is visible is not a man advancing with a weapon, but a man holding a cell phone in one hand, actively recording an interaction between federal agents and civilians. In the seconds before shots were fired, Pretty is seen trying to help a woman who had been pushed and pepper-sprayed by agents, not threatening them. Several witnesses later submitted sworn statements asserting that Pretty never brandished a firearm or acted aggressively at any point. According to a detailed investigative review by independent media and analysts, when agents finally tackled Pretty to the ground, one agent removed a gun from his waistband after he had been pinned down, a sequence that further muddied the official narrative of him being an imminent threat. For many Americans, especially those in the 45 to 65 age group who have lived through decades of national debates over law enforcement, accountability, and federal power, these contradictions spark serious and understandable questions. What really happened that morning? Why does the public account differ so starkly from what independent sources are showing? And why are federal officials sticking to a narrative that many now challenge as inaccurate? None of this has happened in isolation. Minneapolis had already been the site of heightened tensions between federal immigration agents and local communities. Just weeks earlier, another American citizen, Renee Good, was killed by a federal immigration officer under circumstances that also drew scrutiny and controversy. The city has seen repeated confrontations and operations under a federal initiative known as Operation Metro Surge, where thousands of immigration enforcement officers were deployed to carry out arrests and detentions.
The shooting of Alex Pretty has triggered immediate and widespread reactions across local and national platforms. In Minneapolis, vigils and protests have grown, with hundreds gathering in freezing temperatures to demand justice and transparency. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz has publicly criticized the federal response, questioning why state investigators were denied access to the scene and why crucial details, like the identities of the agents involved, have not been shared with local authorities. Pretty's family has been vocal as well. They have described him not as a threat, but as a compassionate caregiver who dedicated his life to helping others, a neighbor, a veteran nurse, and someone deeply involved in his community. His parents called the government's narrative sickening lies and insisted their son was unarmed and peaceful at the time he was killed.
Professional organizations have also weighed in. The American Nurses Association issued a statement expressing deep disturbance and calling for a full and transparent investigation into the shooting, emphasizing that nurses, and all citizens, deserve safety and clear accountability when interacting with law enforcement. But beyond the personal and professional grief, there is a political and institutional argument emerging, one that strikes at the heart of public trust. Federal officials, including Homeland Security leadership, continue to defend their initial account of the shooting. They have maintained that agents acted properly in the face of a perceived threat, even as public video evidence raises serious questions about that portrayal. For the everyday American watching this unfold, there are two simultaneous and competing narratives. One from the federal government describing a dangerous, armed individual confronting law enforcement, and another from independent videos and witnesses showing a man who appears to be peaceful, recording events and attempting to help others. Here lies the growing discontent, not just among protesters on the streets, but among communities and commentators nationwide who are asking, why is the official version still being repeated when evidence suggests otherwise? Many see this as part of a larger issue, a widening gap between official rhetoric and observable reality. This gap fuels distrust, not only toward a particular agency or leader, but toward the very systems meant to protect public safety and uphold justice. And for an audience that has lived through decades of political scrutiny and institutional reform, from civil rights battles to law enforcement oversight, these are not abstract questions. These are deeply personal ones about truth, accountability, and the future of civil discourse in America. What has made this story even more complex and more troubling is what has reportedly been happening inside the Department of Homeland Security since the shooting. According to multiple reports from investigative journalists and former officials speaking on background, there is a growing sense of frustration, anger, and moral discomfort among personnel within DHS, ICE, and Border Patrol over how the incident has been publicly described. These are not political activists or outside critics. These are career professionals who understand how these operations work and who recognize when a public explanation does not fully align with operational reality. A retired DHS official who once supported the administration's enforcement policies described the atmosphere as deeply unsettling, saying that many within the department feel that the language used in press briefings has been overly defensive, politically charged, and disconnected from the evidence now circulating publicly. For agents and analysts who value procedure, documentation, and accountability, this disconnect is not merely embarrassing. It is damaging to the integrity of the institution itself. Several sources have indicated that internal discussions have centered around a simple but powerful concern. When the public can see video evidence with their own eyes, and leadership continues to repeat a disputed version of events, it places rank-and-file officers in an impossible position. They are asked to defend statements they did not write and cannot verify, while facing questions from their own families, friends, and communities. This internal unease is compounded by the fact that morale within immigration enforcement agencies has already been under strain due to intense political scrutiny, legal challenges, and public protests in recent years. Now, many personnel reportedly fear that this incident and the way it is being communicated will further erode public trust and make routine law enforcement work even more difficult and dangerous in the months ahead. At the same time, political leaders from both parties have begun calling for independent investigations. Members of Congress have demanded that body camera footage, communication logs, and operational records be released for review. Civil rights organizations are pressing for federal oversight, while some lawmakers are questioning whether DHS leadership has been fully transparent with both the public and state authorities. Minnesota's Attorney General has stated that his office is prepared to conduct a thorough review of the evidence, but has expressed frustration that federal cooperation has been limited so far. The mayor of Minneapolis has also publicly requested clarity, saying that local officials were not properly briefed before national statements were issued. These tensions between federal and local authorities only deepen the perception that something is being handled behind closed doors rather than in the open. For the American public, particularly those who remember earlier eras of institutional reform and government accountability, this situation may feel familiar. Many viewers in this age group have witnessed past moments when official narratives were later revised, after investigations revealed a fuller picture. That historical memory makes the present moment more sensitive because people know that first statements are not always the final truth. This is why the questions surrounding the Pretty shooting are resonating so widely. It is not only about whether an agent felt threatened in a split second, it is about whether the explanation offered afterward matches what actually occurred. It is about whether leadership is willing to adjust its statements as new evidence emerges. And it is about whether institutions can admit uncertainty instead of defending a position at all costs. Some analysts have noted that the language used by DHS in the days following the shooting was unusually firm and absolute, leaving little room for later clarification. That rhetorical strategy, they argue, may now be contributing to the internal anger being reported, because employees recognize that investigations are still ongoing, yet the public message sounds final and unquestionable. Protests continue across Minneapolis and in several other cities. Community leaders, clergy members, and healthcare workers have joined calls for calm but firm accountability. The fact that the victim was a nurse, someone associated with care, healing, and public service, has added emotional weight to the story and intensified calls for answers. At this point, what the nation is witnessing is not just a legal investigation, but a test of institutional credibility. People are watching to see whether transparency will follow, whether evidence will be shared, and whether officials will be willing to revisit earlier claims if necessary. Trust, once shaken, is difficult to restore, and many believe that how DHS handles the coming weeks will determine how this story is remembered. As a journalist, it is important to separate emotion from fact. The facts we know are these: a man is dead, videos exist that challenge official statements, and voices inside the agency itself are reportedly expressing concern about the way this has been presented to the public. Those three realities alone are enough to justify serious, calm, and independent scrutiny. The suggestion here is not to rush to judgment, but to insist on clarity. In moments like this, the healthiest response in a democracy is patience combined with transparency. Let the evidence be reviewed, let independent investigators do their work, and let the public see what actually happened without filters or carefully chosen words. Because ultimately, this story will not be defined only by what occurred on a Minneapolis street. It will be defined by how honestly the truth is pursued afterward. And that is where the responsibility now lies, not just with investigators and officials, but with all of us as citizens who value accountability, fairness, and trust in the institutions meant to protect us. What do you think? Should agencies wait for investigations before making firm public claims? And how important is transparency in restoring trust after incidents like this? As this story continues to unfold, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This is no longer only about a single moment on a Minneapolis street. It is about what happens after such a moment, how truth is handled, how evidence is shared, and how institutions respond when their version of events is questioned by the very people they serve. In a democracy, public trust is not maintained by firm statements. It is maintained by transparent actions. When videos, witnesses, officials, and internal voices appear to tell different parts of the same story, the responsible path forward is not louder rhetoric. It is quieter, clearer accountability. Release the evidence. Allow independent review. Let facts speak for themselves, not carefully chosen words. My suggestion is simple. Agencies should resist the urge to defend first and investigate later. The order should always be the opposite, because once credibility is damaged, restoring it takes far more effort than protecting it in the first place. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Do you believe officials should wait for full investigations before making strong public claims? And how important is transparency to you when incidents like this occur? Share your thoughts below, because conversations like this are how a society holds itself accountable.